When you hear the term ray tracing, what comes to mind? Probably some really nice cyberpunk style lights or some Minecraft shader. Well, I'll tell you what doesn't come to mind though, a Python script. Well anyways, I made a ray tracer in Python. Okay, stop the music. So most of you are probably already asking the question, why would anyone make a ray tracer in Python? And yeah, that's a good question, which I don't really have an answer to, but apparently I'm not the first crazy lunatic who did this. A YouTuber by the name of G Popcorn actually already did it. Well, kinda. See, what they don't tell you is that there are many types of ray tracing, and the one he did was ray tracing, but the lighting calculations are just using a normal computer-based lighting model, like a normal person. And the reason he did this is because Python is slow, like really slow. Like, guess how long it took to render this scene? Is it A, 2 minutes? Is it B, 10 minutes? Or is it C, an hour? If you chose C, get better, because the answer is actually 4 hours. Yeah, and it still looks very grainy. So for this video, I'll do what he did and another ray tracer that is similar to Sebastian Lake's ray tracer, because I really can't think of any original video ideas and always have to steal from other people. Okay, to start off, let's understand what a ray tracer is. So in normal computer graphics, if you want to make a circle, you can't. What you're actually drawing is a bunch of triangles that are put together in a way that looks like a circle. So what the computer does is takes the vertices of the triangles through the projections and transforms it. Yeah, basically it's a lot of math, and no one actually likes math, so let's move on. Instead, what a ray tracer does is it basically goes and says, why are we trying to fake a circle when we can draw a circle? And when asked how it does that, it goes,
well, first I draw this head, then I erased some of the more detailed features, and 1, 2, 3, a circle thing.
But seriously, it just tries to simulate light that comes out of a light source and draws the stuff that enters the camera, like how our eyes see. But instead of that, we do it in reverse, so we shoot light rays out of the camera and render it if it hits a light source. And we do it this way so that we don't waste as many light rays, as you can see the difference in the number of light rays between the pictures. Okay, so to do this, we just shoot a light ray which can be represented in the form of a direction and a position, which are both just 3D vectors. Then, we just have to turn a pixel a different color if it hits something. But how will we know whether it hit something? Well, to do this, I use an algorithm called ray marching, and I know that there's a better way to do this using maths and the quadratic equation somehow, but that kind of scares me, so let's just stick with ray marching. Basically, what ray marching does is that it gets the shortest distance from every possible object, then goes forward by that distance. This basically ensures that we won't crash into anything. Then, if we haven't hit anything yet, we just repeat the process and move forward again, which is why it's called ray marching. Then, if the shortest distance from the object is really short, like your we can basically assume that we hit it. And if the shorter distance from the object is really large, then we can assume that we hit nothing. Okay, so now we have a pretty concrete algorithm, but we're still missing one part, which is how we're going to find the shortest distance from any object. To do this, we use something called a signed distance field, which I talked about in my physics video, which you should totally go check out, by the way. This sounds very daunting, but it actually just requires some grade 8 math, I think. I'm not really from America, but it should have been taught by then. Anyways, remember Pythagoras' theorem? If we have the center of our sphere at any point, we can get the distance from the 2 points. Then, if we subtract the radius of the sphere, we can get the minimal distance. Another thing to note is that the distance is negative when we're in the object, which is actually important for later. Okay, cool. But this doesn't mean that we can only render spheres. Well, I guess yes, if we are only using this SDF, but there are other SDFs for other geometries, which I'm not going to explain because it's really weird. So let's just stick with spheres for now. Okay, so now if a ray hits, we color it red, and if it misses, we color it white. Let's render the scene, and ta-da, we have a circle. Now you're probably also going to notice how I'm rendering the images line by line, and this is so we can see the progress of the rendering step rather than waiting eternally for the image. Another thing you noticed is that no one can tell that this is a sphere, and this is because we have absolutely no depth or lighting at all. To fix this, what we can do is kind of magical, and it's what normal computers do. First, we define a position for the light source. Then, instead of coloring it red when we hit an object, we can get the normal of a sphere, which is just a vector that points outwards from the surface. Then, we can take the dot product of this normal and a vector from the light source to get an approximate amount of light that reaches the surface. By multiplying this number with the color, we can see how the edges of the sphere are darker, while the surface that points near to the light is brighter. This is called a diffuse lighting, and it works because of something called Lambert's cosine law, which I'm way too stupid to understand, but if it works, it works. Now, if we want to make the surface shiny, we add something called specular lighting. Now, instead of taking the dot product of the normal vector and the light vector, we take the dot product of the reflected vector and the view vector, which actually makes sense since we want to approximate the amount of light that's reflected into our eyes. Then, when we add this to our lighting model and so apparently we need to do one more thing, which is raise this number to some power, which would determine how shiny it is. So let's tone it down and much better. Now, one last thing I want to implement before I move on to another method would be the sum floor and shadows. Apparently everyone likes the checkerboard floor pattern, so to do this we check whether the ray's Y position is lower than the ground, and from this we can get the position of the floor that we would have hit. Now, to make a checkerboard pattern, we just do this, which works for some reason, and bam, we have a nice checkerboard. Now lastly, I just want to add some basic shadows, and to do this it's actually quite simple. So when a light ray hits the floor, we can check whether the area is in shadow by casting a ray towards the light source and seeing whether the ray can reach the light source. If the ray hits an object before reaching the light source, it means it's in shadow, and we can just make the spot darker. Wow, nice! I made a ball that looks like it came out of the 80s. So to render this, it takes around 60-ish seconds, which sounds really bad, but it's actually much better than the next render method, which is called path tracing. See? This way of rendering light is really just an approximation of the amount of light that reaches the surface. If we want something to look more realistic, we would have to simulate every single ray of light all the way until it reaches the light source. To do this, we have to think about what would happen when light in the real world hits an object. Most objects are pretty rough, so when the light ray hits the object, it would bounce off in a random direction. To simulate the roughness of an object, we can make a white noise texture and sample from it. Except mapping a plane into a sphere is really scary and not good for another reason I'll explain later. Instead, we can just make a random vector and make sure that it is pointing in the correct direction by flipping it if the dot product between it and the normal is smaller than 1. Then, if this ray of light hits the light source, we would illuminate the pixel. Okay, let's render it. Wow, that actually turned out much better than I thought, and I think we can all agree that this picture looks much nicer with the transition from light to dark being much smoother. However, we still encounter our first problem, which is that most of the time the light rays would hit nothing, and therefore most of the pixels would be colored black, which is pretty accurate if you go to AF. But in order to fix this, we have to sample with many different light rays, then based on how many light rays hit a source, it would determine how bright the pixel should be. Now here comes the problem. How normal people do this would be to send out multiple light rays from the camera with tiny offsets, then average the results. Except I'm not normal, and this would take absolutely forever in Python. Also, this is why I don't want to use a noise map, because this would mean that I either have to scale it, lerp it, or something else, which seems like a hassle. So instead, what we can do is just sample many different light rays from the object and then average those results. Apart from being much simpler, this means that we could get rid of the noise texture, which makes things a lot more bearable for me. If you're wondering, I sample from 10 different directions, and I only need 4 to hit in order to be at full illuminance, just so that we can see the image clearer. Okay, now let's re-render it. Nice! Now we can actually see the object. The only problem is that it takes much longer. However, you might notice that the picture still looks very grainy, which I'll talk about later. Now, the neat thing about path tracing is that we can actually do some really cool things. So for example, if we let the light bounce off another object before entering a light source, the light would be tinted by the other object's color, and this would tint the main object to a different color. So as you can see here, although the light sources aren't red, because of the floor, the underside of the ball is illuminated, and it also has a really nice red tint. So how we do this is actually really simple, and all we have to do is to keep track of the color of the light, and multiply this color with the object's color after each bounce. Now rendering takes 1.5 hours, but now you can see some really nice illumination. This was worth it, right? But this does make sense, as if our light ray hits another object, we would have to essentially sample 10 more light rays from the object. Or in other terms, the number of light rays grows exponentially as the number of bounces increases. Okay, so now let's address the elephant in the room, which is that the image is really noisy. And this is because some pixels still don't get illuminated despite being sampled from 10 different directions. We can try sampling from 100 different directions, but I feel like I don't need to explain why this is a bad idea. Okay, so 100 light rays per pixel, if it bounces twice, that's 100 squared. And our current one takes 100, so it will be 100 times worse. And since our current one takes 1.5 hours, so instead what we can do is redraw the entire picture, but average the results between the two pictures. So for example, maybe this picture was blue in the first image, but red in the second image. Then we would average the results to make it pink. Just take note that if the pixel is black, we don't average it so that the picture gets progressively brighter. So now if we re-render the image 3 more times, we can see how the image gets clearer with each render. Now we can also use denoising algorithms, but I couldn't get mine to work, so if anyone has a good denoising algorithm, please share it in the comments. Then I can borrow it for my ray tracer. Now I feel like I can't really call my ray tracer a ray tracer without reflections and mirrors, so let's try to add that. Thankfully, it's actually really simple. So instead of having our light ray bounce off in a random direction, we would bias the bounce direction towards a perfect reflection based on how reflective the material is. This sounds pretty complicated, but it's basically just having a base perfect reflection, like this, and adding some random vector to make it look rougher. Now the bigger problem is how to get this reflection vector. Now we already did this for specular lighting, but let me explain actually how to derive the formula. No way! Hand reveal! Yeah, I know this isn't the first time you can see my hands, and the other hand is holding the microphone, as you can see. But this is the first time I'm doing a live recording, so this is the closest you're gonna get to a face reveal. But anyways, so to calculate the reflection vector, I'm just gonna put the microphone over here. You basically have a plane, which is like this is basically the surface of the sphere. And to do it, you get the normal, which is the normal vector pointing out of the sphere. And then you have an incoming ray of light, right? And then you can break this up into the x and y axis. But a problem with this is that you see this surface is curved. So the normal vector isn't always pointing like 100% up on the xy plane. So instead, how we calculate this vector is we have to basically get two vectors, which is this one, and we have to get this one. So this one is based on, I know this is going to be really mathy, I'm sorry, but this one you can get based on the normal vector, but the side to side vector you can only get based on this. So what we do is actually it's quite elegant. So we just plus this vector again. So we get now 2 of these vectors. And then we can just add 2 of this vector up. This vector right here is actually, or more accurately, is just the normal vector times some coefficient to make it a bit shorter. And the coefficient is actually, would be the cosine between this and this. And what's the cosine? It's dot product. Whoa. So basically, you have your incoming vector, which I'll just name I. You have your normal vector, which I'll name N. And the formula for this is, if I'm not wrong, it's I plus 2 times the dot times the normal, if I'm not wrong. So now that we have this, let's render a scene with balls with different reflectivity. Wow, so you can see the different reflectivities, and I also added some environment lighting to see it clearer, because without it, yeah. Okay, I feel comfortable ending the video off here, but that would mean I literally just copied Sebastian Lake's video, which doesn't really sit well with me. So let's add one more thing that he didn't do in his video. refractions. So notice how when you look at a glass of water from a top-down view, the depth of the water looks shorter than it actually is. Or maybe you've seen those physics YouTube shorts which show the arrow changing directions. Yeah, that's refraction. Well, it can't be harder than reflections, right? Right? Well, let me explain to you why Sebastian Lake didn't do this. Refractions fucking suck. To do refractions, we have to understand one thing first, which would be that different objects have different refractive indices. And the higher the refractive index, the more the light would bend. So for example, since the glass has a higher refractive index than air, this is how it would look like if light entered the glass. Now, the rate that it bends is actually not random, gosh darn it, and it's determined by something called Snell's law. Basically, sine I is times n1 is equal to sine r times n2. Now hold on to your ass, because the math behind this is going to get insane. Math session number 2, baby. Okay, so if you don't want this, the timestamp is probably somewhere over there. Yeah, just go to that, because this is going to be really mathy, but I'm just going to cut to the chase. So basically, if we have a circle, and we have incident ray, and the normal, basically what we want to find is the refracted ray, right? And to do this, I'm just going to bring it out a bit. So we have the normal, we have the incident ray, which I'll name I, and we want to get this vector, which represents how much this ray has refracted. And to do this, we need 2 laws. Number 1 is Snell's law, which basically states that n1, which is the refractive index of the material 1, which if it's air is 1.0, times sine of theta 1, which is this angle, is equal to n2, which is the refractive index of theta 2, which is usually 1.5 to the 5th glass, times the sine of theta 2, which is this angle. Okay, that's law number 1, and the reason we need this is because we want to be able to convert this sine, these two are constants, we want to be able to convert this sine into this sine. Yeah. And the second law would be something you learned in trigonometry, sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta is equal to 1. And the reason we need this is so that we can convert sine squared into cosine squared, so that because most of our dot products would be using cosine, but since this uses sine, we need to convert it back into sine. Okay, so now that we have these two things, let's draw the diagram out a bit bigger again. So the first thing that you would notice when to do this is that to do this, we need a horizontal vector pointing this way and a vertical vector pointing this way, like our refractions. And like our refractions, the vertical vector can only be derived from the normal, and the horizontal vector can only be derived from this. Well, technically, okay, that doesn't matter. But the horizontal vector can only be derived from the incident vector. And all that we need to do is scale this horizontal vector by some way such that it will be this distance. And the answer to this is actually already here when we do n1 sine of theta 1. So if I redo the equation again, we would get n1 over n2 is equal to the sine of theta 2 over the sine of theta 1. So this would be the sine of theta 2, and this would be the sine of theta 1. So now that we have theta 2 over theta 1, we can multiply it by this to get this distance. So the first step in this is just a really simple step, which is n1 over n2 times I, and that will give us a vector that shrunk but is pointing in this distance. So now we have the horizontal vector checked off. But now we need something crucial, which is the vertical vector. And you realize that this vector here kind of offset our vertical, but it's fine, and I'll explain why later. But basically now we need to calculate this distance. And to do this, we basically have to make one more observation, which is that the cosine of this would give us this length, and the cosine of this would give us this length. And this length minus this length would equal to this length. And the reason this is good is because the cosine of this is actually really simple. It will just be the cosine of this with the negative normal because it's facing this way, which would just be basically n1 over n2 times the dot of I and negative n. And this would be this distance. But now we need this distance, and to get this, we need the cosine of this. And to get the cosine of this, we need the sine of this. And to get the sine of this, we need the sine of this. And to get the sine of this, we need the cosine of this. So let's just start from the beginning, which is how to get the cosine of this. And that's really simple again. It's just cosine of theta 1 is equal to the dot of I and n. Now, the first thing I'm going to do actually is just square both sides, because like as you can see here, this works with squares. So now to get the sine squared of theta 1, we would basically just do this. So now that we have the sine squared of theta 1, we can use Snell's law over here to convert this into the sine squared of theta 2. And now that we have the sine squared of theta 2, we can actually convert it to cosine really easily by just doing this, which is this formula. Okay, cool. Now we have this distance. So to get this distance, we just minus this distance by this distance, like we said. So it'll just be the cosine of theta 2 minus the dot times the negative normal, because we want it to go this way. And then finally, we just add this vector back. So we get n1 over n2I minus the normal times the cosine of theta 2, which it uses this formula over here, minus n1 over n2 times the dot of I and the negative normal. This is our final answer. Nice. Now that we can calculate the angle of refraction when a light ray enters a denser medium, we can actually also calculate the refraction for when a light ray exits the medium by switching the refractive indices around. Oh, and I made a function that's able to ray march through a medium, since the sine distance field function within the medium would normally be negative, and yeah, it will break. So now if we render this, why is it upside down? What? Yeah, so apparently crystal balls flip the world upside down, kind of like how psychics flip your wallet inside out. Anyways, what's nice about this is how we can concentrate light rays, like how a magnifying glass concentrates light. So if we render this scene with a glass ball and a light, you can see how the light at the focal point is brighter than the surrounding light, which I think is pretty cool. However, when we try different geometries, it breaks. Yeah, so we're forgetting one last thing, which is total internal reflection. This is basically a phenomenon where the light rays get reflected within a denser medium. Okay, number 3, baby. I promise you this one's the last one, and also it's going to be really short. So if you look back at our equation, this n1 over n2, especially if it's going from a denser medium to outside of a denser medium, then this would be like larger than 1. And if this is larger than 1, if this is 1, then this whole part would be larger than 1. And if this whole part is larger than 1, that means this part will be negative, and square root of negative is just a big no-no. So actually, this is actually really useful because it allows us to determine whether we have reached a critical angle or not. With this, we can just do reflection calculations like previously, but instead inside the object. Now, if I turn the sphere into a capsule, it looks really weird. So to see it more clearly, we can stick with sphere geometry and just make the refractive index less than 1, which is basically like turning the sphere into a bubble. Now, when the light ray hits the sphere at a grazing angle, the light gets reflected. But if it hits it at a steeper angle, the light ray enters the sphere and refracts at a large angle like this. Now with this, let's render an image with all 3 materials. So on the left would be blue glass, in the middle would be green metal, and on the right is just a red ball. I was gonna originally talk about some cool distance field mechanics that you can do with ray marching, but this video was originally supposed to be 10 minutes, and it's approaching 30 minutes, so if you want me to continue on my engine, you can tell me in the comments. With that, I'll leave this video off with one more render. So please tell me if you like these laid back videos more rather than my other ones with more animations. And also please consider liking and subscribing. We recently just hit 50 subscribers, which is insane to me. Like, thank you so much. And if I'm able to reach 100 subscribers by the end of the year, I'll learn how to do a backflip or something like cool like that. So thanks so much for watching, and bye.